Welcome back. I hope you've had a nice break. And welcome also to my guests here on stage, Emil Wanngren and Lovisa Curman. A round of applause for our guests here on stage. Emil, you are a strategic business and investment manager at Adven, where you are responsible for industrial partnerships. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, correctly. And Lovisa Curman, you are head of sustainability at Sortera.
Correct.
And actually, your clothing today reflects a bit of what we call the waste hierarchy, eller avfallshierarkin. Could you explain that a bit?
Yes, I will try. The waste hierarchy is part of the directive from the EU, and it specifies how you should get rid of your waste, basically. And you have a hierarchy that is a pyramid upside down.
Right.
And on the top, basically, you shouldn't have any waste. So representing
any clothes,
that,
I would say.
Exactly. So I was gonna come here naked, but it's not proper. So I took a pair of trousers that I've had for 22 years. So it's a basic office black type of pants that I can use. I've been using them off and on for the past 22 years. So that's actually the best way to handle your waste, not to produce any waste. And the next step, and that's why that's up here as a very broad base on the top. And the next step then would be to reuse. So I could take your blazer, or you could borrow my shoes and reuse the clothes. So I have then, my shoes are from a secondhand store or a vintage store, which then would be a more fancy secondhand. And then the blazer as well. And then I have a reused shirt that is more from a loppis, so that's a bit, a cheaper option. And I tried to actually rent clothes for today, but I didn't have time. So that would be the business model to actually
use resources more efficiently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The next step then, I will be quick.
Okay.
Because I don't have it. A recycled piece of clothing on myself.
Right.
It's not that common yet, but the fashion industry and textile industry is on it. But the viable business models there haven't come too far, unfortunately.
Yes, the fashion industry is working a lot with the circular economy.
And then the last two steps.
Oh, are there more?
Yes. The second last is combustion, to burn it. And I actually have a piece of clothes that I think will go to combustion, and that's my underwear.
Okay.
I don't think anybody wants to rent it or borrow it.
And the last step?
And the last step would be, if you don't have anywhere to bring it for combustion, you can put it on the landfill, the old soup tip. So
and the
that's
very last step is those socks that always gets lost in the dryer.
True, that's the black hole.
Yes. So let's get down to business. The transition to a sustainable economy requires us to do things that we haven't done before. So how do you create that willingness to change on a company level as well as on individual level? And what kind of leadership is required to close that gap? And Emil, I know you want to go to action.
Yeah, definitely want to go to action. There's been a lot of talking over the past years, and now it's really time to do something about it. And then there are, of course, different steps of doing it and different hurdles to overcome and different people that you need to not persuade, but to create a willingness to change. So make the transition from the old way of working together and old way of consuming to a new way of doing it more efficiently, smarter, and with more sustainable impact. And closing the gap is, as we have heard earlier today, is about creating business cases that have a short-term, really, really nice economic positive effect that you can show to the board of directors, you can show it to your customers, you can show it to whatever who you're working with. But it has to be built on sustainable and long-term goals. And this is where the challenge starts. And this is also what we at Adven is chasing every day, since we are investing into industries and into infrastructure in society in order to close this gap, make these business cases viable and attractive, and make it happen. We have done this for not long period of time, only 45 years. So we're kind of just starting it. But on the other hand, we have a lot of nice and good partners that we're doing it with, which is the industry, it's also the recycling industry, and we are really into making this change faster because time is ticking.
And Lovisa, how do you create this willingness to change?
Yeah, the willingness to change. I think we need to understand why we need to change. If we don't get the why, it will just be a struggle, and we will use the, the regulations say so, or we will use all these threats to make people change. So I think everybody needs to have their why.
Yes.
And that can be done in different ways. It could be giving a simple example of the waste hierarchy connected to a circular economy and how you create a business model where you actually, for example, then rent out clothes or make money on recycling clothes. We have to start understanding why we need to reduce material consumption today, and how do we do that with business models that you can make money on. And I think when we combine these different perspectives, the why and how you in the long term perspective can gain value, you will find the path.
And Emil, you mentioned goal setting, but going from goals on an EU level down to a company level and going down to concrete actions, that can be difficult. So how do you go about the actual planning and prioritizing towards goals?
Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? Define the goals. So let me take it like this. So we are all aware of the CSRD. We've been discussing it earlier today. And we also know about the scopes, so the scopes 1, 2, and 3. And this is where you can really find tangible goals, and you can understand that by doing this, that you create an interdependency on each other instead of independency. You can see that maybe your goals are, or your targets are different to my targets and maybe different to your targets, but our goals are the same. So we create a common goal. So let's say that you would be an industry that requires services from the two of us. So your scope 1 targets needs to be positively affected, so reduced. Me, who's the provider of the scope 2 targets, for you, those might be my scope 1 targets, and you, who is the supplier of the scope 3 targets, to me or to you. If we work together, then we will find a system or an ecosystem where we each and everyone contributes to our own scope 1 targets, but for the other person or the other company, it's a scope 2 or 3. But by creating this symbiosis, we all have the same goal. We would like to reach our sustainability targets. We would like to apply to these new regulations and would like to make it stronger. And by working together, we can make these fundamental changes together.
Lovisa, you want to add something?
Yes, I completely agree. And also, I think in the legislations from the EU coming now, you actually have great answers and tools to the question. You have your double materiality assessment that you have to do. And if you do it as written, you will actually have your priorities there. And if you are a company that can match the taxonomy, make sure you're aligned, because then you will get all these sustainable funding in the future. So I think you have very good, pointers from the legislation. And if the legislation is constructed as in the ideal picture, we will have a more sustainable future.
So everyone talks about collaborations as a key to success. So building collaborative relationships with suppliers, for example, is central. But how do you go about to actually create these collaborations? What do you say, Lovisa?
Well, your question was about suppliers, but as
well,
we just
can
talked about,
collaborations in
I would
general.
say
Then.
also maybe start with your customer. But of course, you are a customer to a supplier, so you also have to collaborate that way. But today, I think the collaborations are more complex, unfortunately, or fortunately. But to reach a more sustainable future, we have to start collaborating for real. And we have to have more than one thought in our head at the same time. And that's complex. It's difficult. It's difficult to collaborate with your customer and at the same time try to maybe affect the legislation in the local municipality so you can get your permits. more fair and fast. You have to collaborate with the suppliers in order to get to products that you can actually meet your customers' goals with, etc., etc. And this is a complex arena that we haven't explored enough, I think.
So, being responsible for industrial partnerships, you know a bit about collaborations, right?
I do, yeah. And all the industries that we're working together with today who has acknowledged that this is a partnership that actually benefits both or all that are involved, really drives this forward. We can take an example from reality that happened just underneath the radar. As you all know, in the north, there's a huge transition going on in making the steel industry more turning it fossil free. There are other companies in this country that has already done it, but nobody knows. Talked earlier about what is greenwashing, what is green hushing. So maybe they don't want to talk about it, but it still happens. And it doesn't have to happen on a large scale all the time. It can also happen on smaller scales. And also smaller companies who are not as huge enterprises, if they work together, they might be faster, because that's how evolution works, right? If you're fast and if you're maybe a bit smaller and not so big and slow, you can actually make the transition even faster. And then you can become a role model, then you can scale it up. So, collaboration is the key.
Collaboration is the key. We mentioned that earlier, but the transition to sustainability also requires new competences. So how do you ensure that you have the right competences to drive the transition and then to maintain that new way of operating your business, Lovisa?
Well, I think sometimes we talked about it earlier today as well, that we have to maybe expand our teams, etc. But it's about re-educating our teams.
Yeah.
And again, collaborating internally and creating new alliances internally that can solve a problem with more perspectives. So I think we really need to be brave and talk in a very sometimes basic ways about what I know and share it with you, so that we can understand each other. And then together we are creating a new competence that is us, 1 + 1 + 1. So I think that's looking at competence from different perspectives is important.
Emil?
Yeah, well, that's also something interesting, because how much competence do you actually need to insource, and how much competence do you want to look for in a partnership? Because if you build competence around your core business, you just define your core business. But if you do keep that, and then you search for other industries or other companies that actually has this as their core competences, it's much more easier for that company to actually keep and educate that specific specialties and that specific competence. So in the end, you focus on your core and then you thrive together.
So, what do you say would be the biggest challenges that you experience in realizing your sustainability targets?
You mean mine or in general?
You can choose. Say,
thank you.
Not you personally, perhaps, but in general.
Yeah, because they're also already taken care of. Yeah, sure. Let's go for a bit wider perspective than just the company I'm representing. You definitely have to think about the differences between transition and transformation. So there's a lot of transformation going on, and we're doing a lot of transformation, but actually making the transition, that's the harder part. And in order to be able to actually make the transition happen, we have to create not like a fear of what happens if we don't change. We have to create a vision or a willingness to go to the other, to the transition, to the next transition state. So these are the hardest targets to actually overcome, the willingness of change.
Lovisa?
Yes, I think you put it very well. We can work a little bit with fear as well and talk a little bit about the doomsday, etc. It can be a help, but if we don't show what the alternative is, people won't survive working with the pressure of fear only. I do think that some challenges to actually do the transition is also about being brave about what company you are and will be, and or what you will not be. Maybe you won't be part of the transition. Maybe you will be the tail here and just scraping the rest, and then one day you will not be part of the transition. I think it's very important that you look at your own strategy. Where are we heading? And is this real?
Yeah.
Or is it wishful thinking?
Great, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your insights and examples. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Lovisa and Emil.
Thank you.